Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 138 today. And I am here with my guest. This is the third time she's been on my show, Laurie Spencer. How are you doing today, Laurie?
I'm doing great. It's nice to be back with you, Welsh. How you doing?
I'm okay, Laurie. I just had a good, trip in Hong Kong. Went over there, for family stuff. It was very nice, very lovely to get away, from all of the drama that's happening around the world. Needed 10 days rest. How about you? What have you been up to in the last time we talked?
Oh, that sounds lovely. I love Hong Kong. We just enjoyed a nice long weekend for the Thanksgiving holiday. Got to spend some family time and get some sleep. Since this war started 7 weeks ago, it's just been 24/7 news around the clock. I'm so sleep deprived, so tired, emotionally tired. And it gets to you when you work in the news business. You do this day in, day out, around the clock. It gets too much after a while. It's just too much destruction and death and
It
gore.
really does get to you.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, Laurie, I eventually need some times by myself where I just feel like, oh, it's just too much because I suffer from, agoraphobia and horrible anxiety. And it can
Right.
get very overwhelming sometimes. And sometimes you just need to take a break. I'll just focus on sports or something. It's good to have a
Yes.
getaway topic. What do you, Laurie, when you want to get away from politics, what do you like to watch instead of politics when you have a rest?
I'm such a political junkie and a history junkie that even when I take time away from work, I'm usually reading a book about history or politics or watching a documentary about something. Historical subjects are what interest me most. I'm a historian, history buff. So usually that's what I do with my downtime. Right now, I'm reading a wonderful book about President Kennedy, written by Monica Wiesack. It's a great book. It's called America's Last President. Just came out last year. And since the Israel-Palestine topic is so hot right now, people might be interested in it because not too many books about Kennedy's presidency really talk about how he dealt with Israel and the Israel-Palestine conflict. And it's fascinating stuff. I would recommend this book because she really does go there. She goes deeper into that topic than probably any other author I can think of who's ever written about President Kennedy's administration. Really good read. And it also gets into all of his foreign policy everywhere in the world. But you just don't see too much focus on that. So I also posted a Twitter thread today, actually, about JFK's visits. He visited Palestine before there was an Israel. He went there for the first time in 1939.
When he went there, because a lot of people say he went in 1939. When he went to Palestine, a lot of people will say, like pro-Palestinian people will say that Palestine, was a place, which I'll disagree with you on this. I do believe Palestine was a peaceful place before the rise of Israel, but like I was saying, what was his opinion towards the people who said that Palestine, was a place where Christians, Muslims, and Jews lived together peaceful? And like, what was his opinion on it socially? And what did he think about how it was economically that country was? And what was really happening during that time of 1939?
It's a really interesting letter. He wrote this letter to his father, Joseph P. Kennedy, who was then the United States ambassador to the court of St. James in England. And it's like a 4-page letter. I mean, it's single spaced. He's really got a lot of thoughts on it. And it's astonishing to realize that John F. Kennedy was only 22 years old when he wrote this amazing letter to his father about the Israel-Palestine situation. I'm sorry, I misspoke. I said Israel. At that time, of course, Israel did not yet exist as a nation state, so it was all just British Palestine under the Mandate. But I encourage people, you can go to my Twitter. It's Real Laurie Spencer on Twitter. And this thread is pinned now to the top of my page. And I encourage you to read this letter. It is astonishing, his very accurate take on the whole situation with, love for both sides, with great love for humanity. I think he summed it up really well right here. I'm going to read you a quote. He says, I have never seen two groups more unwilling to try and work out a solution that has some hope of success than these two groups. And of course, he's talking about the Jewish settlers and the Arabs that are native to the land. So I think that sums it up perfectly well today in 2023, don't you?
Yeah. Mhm.
They don't, these two sides, see, that's the tragedy of this whole thing. There doesn't seem to be a diplomatic path forward. Neither side is willing to talk to the other side. Both sides are hell bent on war, on bloodshed. You know, the Israelis, they want payback for what happened on October 7th. And Hamas, they're not laying down their guns. In fact, they just, within the past hour, just breaking news, they just violated the ceasefire. We've had a ceasefire, you know, a humanitarian pause for the past 8 days while prisoners and hostages were being switched and traded out, the human bargaining chips. And so Hamas apparently just violated the ceasefire. There are rockets coming into southern Israel again as we speak. So,
Laurie, from your, expertise, from what you gathered, like I said, you and me will have things we disagree about Israel-Palestine. But from your expertise, what do you think that a lot of the pro-Israel people side miss, and a lot of the pro-Palestinian people side miss? Like, what do you think is the one thing in this issue that they really don't mention a lot, that they seem to forget to mention?
that's a really good question. What do the Israelis miss? I think both sides are guilty of dehumanizing the other. And when you have an atmosphere like that, you can't have diplomacy. As you know, I volunteer for the Robert F. Kennedy campaign here in the U.S. And his whole slogan and what the campaign's trying to do and why he's running as an independent is to heal the divide, the partisan divide that keeps our nation fighting with itself, and it's leading us to a civil war. If we don't find a way to live together in peace, we're going to go to war. And what's happening in the Middle East and what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, that's the direction that certain parts of the world are choosing right now. They're choosing war over diplomacy. The Israelis and the Palestinians, they're not going to sit down and talk to each other. They're not going to negotiate, a two-state solution. It's just not going to happen. And if they don't learn to live together in peace, then that's the only outcome, because they're dehumanizing the other. And you can never have diplomacy in an environment like that.
Especially with all the innocent children dying and all that stuff.
Right.
So, Laurie, in your opinion, a lot of pro-Palestinian people will say that Palestine has always been a country. It's always been there. It was obviously in the Old Testament, in the Bible. A lot of conservatives seem to ignore the fact, and Christian Zionists seem to ignore the fact that Palestine was a real place. It was there. And then you've got the pro-Israeli people who say, no, Palestine never existed. It was always, the Jewish people existed there. It was given to them and stuff like that. And it's British mandate and all of the lies. And, the thing about Palestine being in the Old Testament is a complete lie. When you look at how do you view Palestine? Like, how do you think that piece of land, who do you think historically it belongs to, and who do you think has the right to claim more ground in that place?
Well, I have to confess, I am not, I'm a historian, but my specialty is 20th century history. And when it gets into the biblical origins of Israel and all that, I think that's a topic that's meant for historians who are experts on that very complex topic, and theologians to argue amongst themselves. But I can talk about some 20th century history, because that's really, the situation that leads us to where we are today in the 21st century. And it really goes back to the Ottoman Empire losing in World War I to the British. And then the British were the ones who decided who got what land. And the British made promises to both sides and they broke promises to both sides. The British turned out not to be honest brokers in that agreement, as we all know. So then we had another world war, right? And those 20 years passed in between. You know, you said earlier that, and I hear this a lot, but it's just not true. You hear this narrative that, oh, you know, the Jews and the Arabs lived together in peace before the creation of Israel and everything was fine and they loved each other. And that's not true, folks. That's not true. When you look at the history, there were numerous pogroms that happened, say, between 1917. It really picked up after 1922 when the mandate was being enforced by the British. And they started displacing Arabs. And of course, then fighting broke out and Jews were attacked and pogromed. And so the same thing that was happening over in Europe when you saw the pogroms in Ukraine, say between 1919 and 1921, where, you know, the White Army and the Ukrainian nationalists would come riding into towns in the Soviet Union, in Soviet Ukraine, and just set the whole town on fire, burn the place down, rape the women, take the children or kill the children, kill all the men, throw them in a pit, shoot them. That's what they did in Europe, and that's what they were doing in the Holy Land as well to Jews. So in the early 1930s, as soon as Hitler came to power, the Grand Mufti of Palestine, who ironically had been appointed by the British, he ended up becoming an ally with Adolf Hitler. And as I was explaining earlier, off the air, that we all know about the Banderites over in Ukraine, right? And the OUN, the OUNB, Stefan Bandera, the Ukrainian nationalists. The reason that they made a deal with Hitler and collaborated with the Nazis in World War II is the exact same reason that the Palestinians did. They did so for two reasons. Number one, both Bandera and the Arab Palestinians wanted their own homeland. They wanted independence, right? They wanted to establish a state of Palestine because at that time they didn't have one. And they wanted the Nazis to help them. And also the second reason, and the same thing that the Ukrainian nationalists had in common with the Arab nationalists, was that they both hated Jews. And Hitler hated Jews. And they wanted to eradicate them, not just from their countries, but from the face of planet Earth. So they, enemy of my enemy is my friend. And they all hated the British. So that's how political alliances work, my friend, in the cynical world of global politics and warfare. And then after the war, the alliances changed. As you also know, after World War II, initially, when the State of Israel was created, the Soviet Union and the United States were the only two major countries that were really supporting that. Joseph Stalin was a big supporter of creating the State of Israel. It was because of his lobbying and the lobbying of the Soviet government that Israel wouldn't exist today without the help of the Soviet Union. But then, during the Cold War, things changed yet again. And the Russians ended up becoming allies with the same Arab nationalists that they'd been fighting in World War II. The Arab nationalists had like 20,000, I think it was 20,000 Waffen-SS battalions fighting in North Africa with Hitler in World War II. And so they wanted to kill Russians. They wanted to kill communists. The two declared enemies of, the radical Palestinians back then in the 30s and 40s were A, Jews, and B, communists. They wanted to kill every last communist because, like Hitler, they believed that Jews and communists were one and the same. They believed in this myth called Judeo-Bolshevism. And you're probably...
because a lot of them do say that, like, Jews created communism. Like, what is your opinion towards that? And, like, the people who say that Jews are to blame for the Bolshevik Revolution where many innocent Russians died?
Well, in the Bolshevik Revolution, I mean, many of the original revolutionaries were Jewish or part Jewish. But so what? I mean, it just so happened that the majority of communists happened to be Jewish in Russia and Ukraine, the former Soviet Union. And, oftentimes the reason for that was because the Red Army protected them from the White Army and the Ukrainian nationalists during the pogroms that had happened 20 years before in parts of Ukraine, where I think it was 200,000 Jews and Poles were killed in these horrible pogroms. And in every village, when the Ukrainian nationalists or the White Army would come riding into some little Jewish village, burn the place down, kill the children, kill the women, kill the men, take them out, put them in a pit, shoot them. It was always the Red Army. It was the communists. It was the Soviets who rode into town, stopped the pogrom, punished the perpetrators, nursed the sick, and buried the dead. So the Red Army, the Soviet Union wasn't perfect. It had its own anti-Semitism problem. But they were better to the Jews than any other place in Europe, and they gave them more rights at that time than any other country in Europe and protected them. And let's not forget who liberated most of the concentration camps. That was the Soviet Army. So they were the Jews' best ally. And then that changed in the 1950s, especially after Stalin's death. It really changed under Khrushchev. Their relationship towards Israel became chilly. Now, the Soviet Union did help Israel win the 1948 war, the Arab-Israeli War of 1948, as some call it the Nakba. The Soviet Union, of course, was allied.
When you look at people who say it's the Nakba, which a lot of innocent Palestinian, so pro-Palestinian people will say, like me, will say that the Nakba is bad, it was terrible. A lot of, the IDF and the Israeli soldiers, especially led by that Israeli leader, was a Manak leader at the time, killing a lot of. What is your opinions towards that? The people who believe that the Nakba was the worst thing, and what do you think that the pro-Palestinian people miss in the Nakba when they're trying to say the Nakba happened and it was bad? What do you think of that? And what do you think are the biggest misconceptions that the pro-Palestinian people have of the 1948 war?
Well, it all depends on which side you're looking at that war from.
And the pro-Israeli people have the misconceptions they have.
Right. I think that in terms of the geopolitical situation, the United States was coming to we were allies with Israel too. So the Palestinian people and their armies were not well armed or equipped to deal with, both the Soviet Union and the United States backing Israel in that war. So that Israel won that war because they had superior firepower and they had the backing of the USSR and the United States in that war. The Palestinians didn't stand a chance. They just didn't have the infrastructure, the war power to fight back. And as you well know, Welsh, the party that always wins the war is whoever has the most guns. And Israel had the most guns. And a lot of terrible things were done to the Palestinian people. And yes, they were displaced from their land as the result of, winner take all. In the end of a war, to the winner go the spoils. And the spoils in that case was the land. It's just like, when the Ottomans lost the war to the British in 1917, 1918. To the winner go the spoils, and that's how the British ended up with Palestine in the first place.
So, Laurie, when you look at that, right, obviously right now, there is, as we all know, a lot of conservatives will say that there is a big, Islamic regime, controlling the United States Congress and stuff like that. But when you look at, for example, the Zionist regime, which right now they had a vote in Congress where they basically said, that where a lot of, only two people voted against it. It was this Thomas guy and this other person.
Yeah, basically it was Thomas Massey and I think AOC.
Yeah, AOC too, which is surprising. I think AOC is just doing it for votes because she's a fraud herself. but when you look at like that, knowing the fact that, especially, how a lot of, the Democrats and Republicans will, side with the apartheid state of Israel, and how a lot of them, whether it's Trump, whether it's Biden, whether it's Chuck Schumer or the other presidents combined, will come out and say that, that we should defend Israel and all that stuff. And knowing the fact, that if they go against that and they say that, the state of Israel is an apartheid state, the capital of Jerusalem is not Israel, it's actually Palestine. And a lot of them speak against, like calling out the Zionist regime that controls America, especially with knowing how influential it is in the United States government, knowing that Israel is one of the biggest globalist states up there with Saudi Arabia, Ukraine, and Taiwan, and the country next to Armenia, Azerbaijan. Sorry if I butchered that pronunciation. And knowing the fact that, sorry, can you just give me a minute, Laurie? I'm just trying to find something. But knowing the fact that, like, especially, knowing that some people were bringing up a bill that they originally introduced. They introduced a bill called, back in I think 2019. This was when Trump was in power, called the Israel Anti-Boycott Bill, that could imprison Israel boycotters for 20 years. Basically, it says you could be penalized for $250 and a maximum criminal penalty of 100 million years and $1 million and 20 years in prison. When you look at that, especially knowing the fact that, like how the United States government under Biden is getting more fascist, they're getting more protective over the globalist elite, knowing the fact that a lot of people are waking up to the New World Order, Agenda 30, do you think that they're going to introduce something like that again in the future, where they're going to make it a crime to criticize, the state of Israel? Do you think they'll introduce something where, saying anything about the Zionist regime, even questioning it, or like bringing up the video of who's the congresswoman of 2007, where she said, that basically that lawmakers have to pledge an allegiance to say that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel?
That was Representative Cynthia McKinney.
Yes, Symphony McKinney, basically the embassy of Jerusalem. Do you think that is over-exaggerated, that conspiracy, or do you think they're going to introduce something like that, knowing the fact that the state of Israel, has had 57 UN revolutions in it, knowing the fact, that Israel has killed, knowing the fact, that during this, conflict that's going on, the fact, that 434 people, Palestinian children have died, compared to that of 177 Israel children, which you don't hear from the Western media. Knowing the fact, that since, January to September the 6th, 2023, 47 Palestinian children have died. Knowing the fact, that during this war, you've had 2,031 people die. You've had 350 people be injured. You've had more than 67 journalists be killed. I actually saw the last time was 69. And knowing the fact that 124 health facilities have been targeted by the IDF, and knowing the fact, that the health staff, 446, health staff members have been targeted. Do you think that they will introduce like a Zionist bill, or do you think it's exaggerated a bit?
Well, first thing I wanted to ask before I answer your question is the numbers that you just gave about the casualty figures. What's your source on those?
I'm getting them from If Americans Knew, and also this website called Palestine Chronicle, and also Euromind Human Rights Moderator.
Okay. So those sites are quoting figures that are given to them by the Gaza Health Ministry, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah. And that is run by Hamas, which is the government in Palestine.
But what do you think about those figures, though?
So I don't trust them. I think they're, I mean, would I trust figures that come from the guys who stormed into Israel on October 7th and committed these heinous crimes? Would I trust those guys to tell the truth? No. Would I trust the IDF to tell the truth? No. So we really don't know what the true casualty figures are on either side, because both sides are going to lie and inflate them. But we can tell from what we see with our own two eyes that obviously a lot of people are dying, and it's tragic on both sides. So I don't like to play that game of whataboutism of, well, my injury is worse than your injury, or raping a Jewish woman is worse than raping a Palestinian woman, or a Palestinian baby is more valuable than a Jewish baby, or vice versa. I don't think that whataboutism helps us reach a solution. As far as legislation in the Congress, it's we all know that APAC has a huge role to play, and has since 1944. The Zionist lobby holds a lot of power in Washington. And it's the reason why support for Israel, military support, has been in our budget every year since the creation of Israel. It's why we've been allies with them since prior to 1948. And it's bipartisan. It's both parties that support this overwhelmingly. And you could see by the vote that just sailed through the House with only 2 dissenting votes where our Congress stands on the matter. I mean, it is a bipartisan thing. Biden supports Israel, or so he says. Trump supports Israel so much that he wants to turn Gaza into a parking lot. Those are his words, not mine.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay? Robert F. Kennedy Jr. supports Israel. Every presidential candidate in the race currently, except for Dr. Jill Stein and Cornel West, they're the only ones who support Palestine. So, it's just been a thing in American politics since 1944, in the election of 1944, when all of the candidates from Roosevelt to Wilkie, everybody was, advocating for a creation of a Jewish state in Palestine. And then that happened, of course, under Harry Truman when he ascended to the presidency. So it was just one of those things that if you want to be in American politics, those are the rules of the game, whether you like them or not. And Rashida Tlaib just found out the hard way, that what her fellow Congress critters think of her.
Yep, that's absolutely true. So what do you also think about the people who say that October the 7th was an inside job, and that this is just an excuse, especially knowing the fact that the Israeli army has the most advanced tech in the whole world, and knowing that Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal? Do you think that this was an inside job to pretty much, fulfill the greater Zionist project, which is basically, Israel coming in, and which has been a plan of the globalist elite for a long time to take over the Middle East and stuff like that, especially when Benjamin Netanyahu on September the 23rd said he had a plan in the UN meeting to create a new Israel. Do you think this is just a plan for, the globalist elite to use the state of Israel to attack Iran? Because for a long time since Iran, knowing the fact it doesn't have a centralized Rothschild bank.
Yeah, of course I'm a conspiracy theorist, so I always immediately look for a conspiracy. And my first thought on October 7th, when the attacks happened, I thought, how in the hell did Hamas manage to pull this off? When Israeli security is supposed to be the best in the world. It just, my first thought, was immediately inside job. And there's an interesting story out today in the New York Times that shows that Israel knew that there was an attack plan codenamed Jericho Wall. And it was a Hamas plan to attack Israel that outlined point by point exactly the kind of devastating invasion that led to the deaths of about 1,200 people. And that Israeli officials at the time knew about it a year ago, but they dismissed it, thinking that Hamas couldn't possibly pull this thing off. So they had specific warnings, just like we did prior to 9/11, right? We knew several months in advance what was happening and what was coming, and we ignored the warnings. Well, it looks like Israel, they say it's their 9/11. It is their 9/11. It's a terrible intelligence failure. And even the New York Times is reporting on that now. So, I think that there is some case to be made that it could have been an inside job, or at the very least, a catastrophic failure of Israeli intelligence.
What else facts do you think people miss about it too that they should mention more?
About the attacks on October 7th?
Yeah.
I think that people, especially people on the pro Palestine side, fail to have any care in their hearts. I see a lot of shocking commentary on Twitter. Now, some of it might just be anti Jewish sentiment, that they don't have any love or sympathy in their hearts for the Jewish people, the civilians who were raped and killed on October 7th in such brutal ways. If they, if they can't find any love in their heart for the other side, and I see a lot of that same talk from the pro-Israeli side. They look at the Palestinian people as animals. When you dehumanize each other and you don't put yourself in their shoes, I mean, how would you feel if they kidnapped your mother or your grandmother? How would you feel if they flattened a building? If the Israelis blew up your building and you lost family members in an airstrike? It, it seems that people are lacking in sensitivity lately. This war has brought out some really sick and dark emotions in a lot of people, and it makes me sad.
It has. It really, I really feel like, Laurie, it doesn't help the fact that the conservative side won't mention that the conservative side keep missing the fact about the innocent Palestinians who are dying. And it doesn't help the fact that some of the pro-Palestine side is kind of missing some points. Like I said, I'm more in line with the pro-Palestinian side, but I definitely think, kind of sides in a way, both of them have made mistakes. And we need to get along, because the state of the world is not doing very good at the moment. And it's sad. It really is sad, to see the state of where this is going at the moment.
Well, I support the Palestinian people who do not support Hamas. Let me be real clear about that, because I'm not a Zionist. I don't support Bibi Netanyahu. I don't support the Israeli government. But I also don't support Hamas. And, according to polls, and I don't know how much you trust polls, but the most recent polls, as of about a week to 10 days ago, are saying that even after the events of the last 7 weeks, that 75%, 3/4 of the Palestinian people in Gaza support Hamas. And Hamas is their elected government. Now, they haven't had an election since 2007. You can ask yourself why they haven't had elections. It sounds to me like Hamas just basically did the fascist thing and took power and established a dictatorship, and they're not allowing the people to vote. But if they did have an election tomorrow, Welsh, they would probably re-elect Hamas. And the question is, how do you expect Israel and the Western nations and some of the Arab nations who don't support Hamas and detest Hamas, how do you expect the United Nations to deal with you? How do you expect to be accepted on the international stage after you've shown the world your true face on October 7th? You've shown yourselves to be bloodthirsty criminals. How do you expect to be diplomatically recognized by civilized nations if that's how you behave? And I think that is the question that we have to ask when we look at things like a two-state solution. I want to see the Palestinian people have a legitimate government, and Hamas is not it. If they have a legitimately elected, moderate government, then they can come to the table and actually do real diplomacy with Israel, with the United States, and with the rest of the world. But if you've got, a gang of thugs running your country, don't expect to be respected or recognized diplomatically on the world stage. They've got to get rid of Hamas if they want to be free, because they'll never be free under Hamas.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people also, make a mistake, which you, me, and can agree on, that a lot of people like to say that all Jews are Zionists. A lot of people like to say that Zionism is the same as Judaism, which is not true. So, for example, there's a summary here saying Christian Zionists are among the majority of Zionists. There can actually be different religions who can be Zionists. Zionism is a racist ideology that serves to enable imperialism. That's true. The biggest number of Christian Zionists in the United States is more than 30,000. The term Christian Zionist was used by Theodore something was the first Zionist and Congress in 1897. Christian Zionism is understood as a belief that Jewish right have a right to return to the Jews who can trade their roots to the original tribes of Israel, not conflict. It also says here, Christian Zionists believe that Jews have deprived themselves of both eternal and sound moral guidelines. So basically, they believe that Jews aren't actually, true, that Jews have gone away from the true teachings of Zionism. That basically right there will label, why Zionism is not the same as Judaism. And it says here, therefore, Zionism is not Judaism. Before anti-Zionist is not being anti-Zionist is not anti-Semitic. Of course it's not, which a lot of people seem to miss. And yeah, so what is your thoughts on those facts when people mention that?
Well, Zionism has always been controversial within the Jewish community. As long as Zionism has existed, it's been controversial. I'm not Jewish, but Jews debate this among themselves, and they have for more than a century. And, there is that, it is true that Judaism and Zionism are not the same, but it does bother me when I hear it being repeated a lot lately by neo-Nazis, like actual neo-Nazis. Some of the biggest neo-Nazi accounts on Twitter love to say that. They say, oh, I'm not anti-Jew, I'm anti-Zionist. And then you go scroll through their Twitter feed and you notice that they're retweeting stuff that Hitler said. They're like total racists, total Nazis. And, it's unfortunately a moment like this brings the neo-Nazis out of the woodwork. And, it is true that in Nazi Germany, they often said the same thing in Nazi propaganda that was distributed throughout the Arab world. That, they used that same argument. They said, oh, we're not anti-Jew, we're just anti-Zionist. And of course, now we all know just how anti-Jew they were. They rounded them up, they put them in gas chambers, and they murdered millions of them. So I don't always trust or believe people who use that argument. When you hear somebody say that, go take a look at their social media before you retweet them, and make sure that you're not accidentally retweeting a Nazi, because there's a lot of it out there.
There is a lot of it. Kim Iverson just posted a new video here saying that apparently there were silent cries of babies in Gaza. Basically, she's saying the decomposing of babies have now been discovered inside the ICU of, I think, sorry, I can't pronounce this, but it's a hospital in Palestine. The babies are still in beds where they were left with ventilators and other equipment attached to them. It's what's left of them. These are not babies. They're not Hamas. So what's your thoughts on that? And what is your thoughts on the people who said about the 40 beheaded babies, especially when there are people saying, I don't think it's true. I think it's actually a load of rubbish by the mainstream media to make Israel's side look like more of the victim. What is your thoughts on this story that just broke up with Kim? And what is your thoughts on the 40, babies that decapitated? Do you think it's true, or do you think that it's Western propaganda?
Well, I can't comment on the Kim Iverson piece because I haven't seen it yet. She just posted it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like within the past hour. No, I haven't looked at that yet. I haven't heard about that yet. So I don't want to venture and make a comment about something if I don't know what I'm talking about. And same kind of goes for what they call the 40 beheaded babies. I honestly don't know the answer to that, because I know that the IDF is still trying to identify bodies from October 7th. And so I can tell you this, I was allowed, I'm a journalist, and so I got access, I got media credentials to see the 47-minute film of what happened on October 7th. And I've seen a lot of still photographs of the aftermath. And I can tell you that I did see babies that looked burned, badly burned, like charred to a crisp. And I can't tell if their heads were attached or not, because honestly, Welsh, I couldn't bring myself to look. Once I saw the burned bodies, I looked away. And I just didn't want to zoom in and take a real close look to see if the baby's head was still attached or not. I'm sure there are forensic professionals who can handle that sort of thing and it doesn't traumatize them, but it traumatized me. Dude, what I saw on October the 7th was so horrible that I'm still having nightmares after seeing that film. I absolutely can't get over it. And I've also seen terrible things in the aftermath of the airstrikes in Gaza. And so my question is this, if I could ask a Hamas leader a few questions. My questions would be, you've been fighting Israel for years, right? And every time you launch an attack on Israel, Israel punishes Gaza with airstrikes, right? So when you launched this attack on October 7th, you knew what kind of response you were going to get, right? You knew they were going to bomb the fuck out of Gaza, okay? And they did. And they've killed thousands of people. So my question to a Hamas leader would be, if you care about your people and you knew you were going to attack, why didn't you evacuate your people before the airstrikes came? Why wasn't that your top priority, protecting the Palestinian people who you are elected to represent? Did you really think that Israel wasn't going to bomb the fuck out of you after you attack their country like that? What did you expect to happen, dude? I mean, really, can we just speak honestly here? And the question is, why isn't Hamas protecting the Palestinian people? Why aren't they letting them leave Gaza? Because I don't know about you, Welsh. If I lived in Gaza and October 7th happened and I saw those airstrikes coming, I'd be thinking about leaving, wouldn't you? Why the hell would you stick around? You'd be getting the hell out of Dodge, right? You'd pack a suitcase and get out of there. Grab your kids and get out of there. And there are people who have tried to leave, and Hamas will not let them leave. So you tell me, I mean, are they doing a good job of representing the Palestinian people that we care about? The innocent people, the civilians? Who's protecting them? Is it Hamas? Because that's their job. How are they doing? Are they doing a good job?
Hang on. Sorry, man, I'm just looking for something. I know it is very, very sad to see, What do you think will happen to Benjamin? What is your thoughts on Elon Musk visiting, Israel and him talking to Benjamin Netanyahu, the war criminal? And a lot of people were giving him a lot of flack for that. And then all of a sudden he goes on like a stage with Bob Iger, who obviously is a bit of a Zionist himself. And then he says, something that all of a sudden the conservatives are praising him. What's your thoughts on that, Laurie?
Elon Musk is such a puzzle, isn't he? He's so self-contradictory. I can't figure him out. One day he's, agreeing with Megyn Kelly. I saw him chime in on one of Megyn Kelly's tweets a couple of weeks back, where she was talking about the rise in anti-Semitism in the United States and the attacks on Jewish people. And Elon agreed with her. He said, this is unacceptable. And then the very next day, Elon turned around and put out that controversial tweet that got him in so much hot water when he, jumped on some Nazi's tweet and said, oh, yeah, you're speaking the actual truth. And then, of course, the ADL got mad and the Jews got mad at Elon Musk. And so then he was in a hell of a position because his advertisers are pulling away from Twitter and he's being accused of being an anti-Semite. And so then, perhaps as a goodwill gesture, he made the visit to Israel, went and kissed the ring of Netanyahu, toured the site, watched the film, the same film that I saw, which is deeply disturbing. And he did a Twitter space with Netanyahu, which was really kind of interesting, where he agreed with every word that Benjamin Netanyahu said. And then the very next day, Elon was on CNBC saying, fuck my advertisers. If you want to boycott me, well, fuck you. And so you just cannot figure this guy out. I don't know what side he's on because he seems to be very skillfully playing both sides.
I think that Elon Musk is kind of like Donald Trump. I think if he was a president, if he became president, he would be the same thing as Donald Trump. Like he would do some good things and some bad things.
Right, right, yes, right. Because he's such a walking contradiction, much like Trump. Yeah, but I think the Constitution would prevent Elon from running because he's not a U.S. citizen. I hear a lot of
So
people say, Elon for president, and I'm like, I don't think that would work.
no, absolutely not. So as we all know, Henry Kissinger just passed away at age 100. And I saw a very good article basically where, of course, I don't wish him to rest in peace. He's a horrible human being. He should have been locked up in prison, especially with all the war crimes he committed. Especially, when it says here. So when you look at his death, knowing the fact it says here that these are some of the biggest crimes he did, Laura, it says he carpet bombed Colombia, which killed about 1,500 people to 500,000 people, civilians, like 3,875 bombing raids between 1969 and 70. He also gave the green light for Pakistan to launch its brutal killings in Bangladesh, which led to 3 million people. He approved Argentina's dirty war against the left-wing Argentinians, which killed about 30,000 people. And also he did the bombing, of Laos, which the United States dropped 260 million bombs on an estimated 200,000 people. And he oversaw Nixon's years of the imperial wars in Vietnam, the final death toll of 2.53 million. When you look at like Henry Kissinger, what would you say is the one crime that a lot of people miss about him, knowing the fact he did all this horrible stuff? What would you say is your least favorite moment of him of all time? And what would you say was the greatest crime he did that no one talks about, that everyone is not aware of?
Well, where do you start? You want me to just pick one? There are so many things that I disagreed with Henry Kissinger on. I was never a fan of his, but I also have this, I don't know, my parents always told me not to disparage the dead, or at least the recently dead. And since he just passed away, I'm not going to disparage him, and I will try to find a couple of compliments to pay him. I thought he made a good deal with China when he was Nixon's Secretary of State. Also, I'll give him this. He was the only voice of reason, and believe me, this surprised the hell out of me. But in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Henry Kissinger was the only voice of reason and diplomacy this past year and a half. He was early in the war trying to get Zelensky and Putin to talk to one another. And he told the truth that one time when he said that Russia's going to win this war. Ukraine doesn't stand a chance, and we're running the risk of nuclear war and World War III, and he warned against it. And today, I wanted to read this to you. President Putin put out a statement that was very kind about Henry Kissinger. And he said, and I'll just read it, quote, "An outstanding diplomat, a wise and far-sighted statesman who enjoyed well-deserved respect around the world for decades has passed away. I had multiple opportunities to talk face-to-face with this profound and extraordinary man, and I will certainly cherish the warmest memories of him." That was Vladimir Putin today on Henry Kissinger. So maybe not what you'd expect, but that's what Putin said, and he couldn't have been any kinder. All of the Russian diplomats have said exceedingly kind things about Dr. Kissinger today upon his passing. So for what it's worth, there it is.
What books, from studying your research, knowing what you know of Henry, what books would you recommend someone to read, and what's a good documentary on him? Like, what would you say is an unbiased documentary of him that's very good?
To be honest, I've never read, I have not read Kissinger's memoirs. I never had a great interest in Kissinger because I wasn't a fan of his. So I really don't have any to recommend. I just know I've known him all my life. You know, I'm a Gen Xer, and some of my first memories of him are when I was a child and he was Nixon's Secretary of State, and I remember his outstanding diplomacy in China. And after years and years of waging illegal wars around the world to kill communists, suddenly he was in the mood to make a deal with them. And I thought that was a step in the right direction. He took some great strides in bringing the Cold War to an end. And I have to give him some credit for that.
Yeah, he does deserve some credit where that was due. So,
I
Laurie,
mean, even
is
even
it
bad people can do some good things, and I think when someone of his stature dies, we should try really hard if we can to try and find something good to say about the man, and I think that that's what President Putin did today, and it's a good example to set for us all. That was good diplomacy, and I'm all about diplomacy.
So, Laurie, what is your opinion on the new Argentinian president? Because a lot of the libertarians are very happy he won, and
Yeah, he's awesome.
a lot of people say that he's against the elite and the establishment, but they ignore the fact that he's on the WEF website. He literally wanted to support Ukraine, basically, saying give more money to the neo-Nazi in the Ukrainian army. He basically said in 2021 that people should get vaccinated, otherwise the economy is going to collapse and stuff, which is very, globalist
Mm.
of him, and it's very unconstitutional, very unfreedom. And especially, how he had a meeting, with Bill Clinton. What do you think of Javier? Do you
Mm.
think and what do you think about the fact that some libertarians are cheering him on without ignoring the fact that he is a WF member and he did some of these silly things before?
Right, right. That puzzles me too. It seems a strange take for the libertarians to be liking this guy. And I can't really claim to know that much about him, but I do know what his past policy positions have been. And, it's an interesting trend, Welsh, how you could say maybe it started with Donald Trump back in 2015, that the people are so hungry for an outsider, for somebody who's different, for someone who at least claims to be for liberty, for freedom, for nationalism. That's how Trump came to power. That's how Meloni, remember last year, she was the hottest thing with libertarians in Italy. And when she was running, of course, all the libertarians and the conservatives thought she was the cat's meow. And they thought she was going to be a friend to Russia in the war. And boy, were they wrong. I was
Oh,
trying.
absolutely.
I was trying to warn them before she came to power. I'm like, guys,
And
it's a
and also
psyop. It's
and
not
also the
true.
new Netherlands Prime Minister, Laurie. He's just another
Good.
right. And you know what's scary, Laurie? There's a guy who I watch called Theodore, something, can't pronounce his second name, but I don't agree with everything he says. He's got different views on Israel-Palestine, which, of course, I got different views to that. And he did a very good video of talking about the rise of the far right in Europe. And if you look at the Netherlands prime minister who just got elected, and you look at how the far right German party is coming into play, especially how they don't really like Israel and stuff and Jews and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's very scary because Europe is really starting to become like it was in the 1940s. It's
Yikes.
not very good.
I know. It scares me too, Welsh. What I've seen happen really over the last 10 years in Europe is very troubling to me. And now you see, and there is an immigration problem. They've had a big immigration problem from the Middle East
Which
for many years.
Colonel Gaddafi warned us about. He
Yes,
said
he did.
if you're going to screw up Libya, a country that was very good, had free healthcare, wonderful trade, was probably had the highest standard of living in Africa. And this is the NATO and the global elitist karma for ruining the Middle East.
And then you see what happened in Ireland last week, right? Where the Irish people rose up and they said enough, right? And they rioted in the streets. So of course, it's not our problem yet, but it is becoming our problem in North America too. Our southern border's been wide open for the last 3 years. we don't know who the hell is coming across our southern border. And they're coming from all over the world. And so, for all we know, we've got, terror sleeper cells right here in the United States. I'll tell you this, right here in my neighborhood, and I live in Oklahoma, we're 500 miles from the southern border. But we're seeing a huge influx of new migrants here because we're not that far. They can hop a Greyhound bus down there at Del Rio at the border. They can be up here in 8 hours. And so a lot of them are coming here. Just tonight, earlier tonight, I was out, went to the grocery store and another store here in my neighborhood. And one guy, the same guy, robbed both of those stores at gunpoint and cleaned out the cash register, scared the hell out of everybody. Fortunately, did not shoot anybody, but it was an armed robbery. He hit both stores within the hour, and they said they couldn't tell exactly what his nationality was. They guessed he was Haitian because he was speaking another language that they didn't speak. But yeah, he was definitely a newly arrived migrant. And unfortunately, we're seeing a huge crime wave happening as a result of this. So not everybody coming across our southern border is our friend, and that's a fact. And it's true in Europe as well, and it's much worse over there. So we do have this problem. We've been ignoring it for a long time, hoping it would go away. But when you leave your border open like that, it's not going to go away. It's going to get worse.
You also mentioned that Robert F. Kennedy said that Biden was bringing in more, trucks like of immigrants. Like, sorry, I can't seem to find it, but can you tell us more about that, Laurie?
Well, Bobby Kennedy, he has taken a strong position on the border that is at odds with his own Democratic Party. It's one of the reasons he had to leave the Democratic Party. This is Biden's party of open borders and free immigration for all. Bobby Kennedy is not there with him on that. His position tends to be more in agreement with the Republican policy. In fact, he's gone further than most Republicans. He wants to close the border until we can get a hand on who's here, who we're going to let stay, who we're going to send back. He wants an orderly, legal, humane process, and that's not what we have right now.
Fair enough. That's very good. I've kept an eye on Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and it was very scary what happened to him, 2 months ago back, where there was a guy in his campaign tried to kill him, and it's like the deep state, are trying to target him right now, and it's
yeah, it is.
It's very. How do you think Robert F. Kennedy's going to get? How far do you think he's going to get in the next election? Do you think he's going to get far, or do you think that they're going to try and find a way to stop him?
Well, they're going to try to stop him. They already are. They've done everything that they possibly can to slow him down, to stop him, to drain his campaign coffers of money, because they refuse to provide Secret Service protection, even though he qualifies. He meets every benchmark for Secret Service protection.
Like, what lies are they making by saying he doesn't qualify for Secret Service? What excuses are they making?
They're mainly using the excuse that in the letter of the law, you can only get Secret Service protection, I think it's 120 days before the general election. But, every presidential candidate since, I think Ted Kennedy back in 1979, he got Secret Service protection at least a year before the election. Basically, whenever a candidate requests it, if they're a serious candidate with a major party or polling at 20% or better, they always get Secret Service protection. Bobby Kennedy is the only major candidate in presidential history who has requested Secret Service protection, meets all the benchmarks, and doesn't get it a year ahead of the election. It doesn't make any sense. Trump got it over a year before the election. Obama got it over a year before the election. Everybody who's ever requested it except Bobby. And yet, there were no threats against Obama or Trump like we're seeing against Bobby. I mean, he gets so many threats, it's not even funny. I'm close enough to the campaign to know a lot of what goes on behind the scenes. And, his security firm Gavin DeBecker and Associates. He pays for private security, pays a lot for private security, and they're the best. They're really, really good. But they sent the Secret Service, and this was like 4 or 5 months ago. They sent a 67-page document documenting all these threats. These are not like your run-of-the-mill online threats. These are people who are serious. And the Secret Service completely ignored that document. Then you've got the case of Adrian Paul-Aspiro. He's the guy that showed up in Los Angeles back in September at one of Bobby's events, armed to the teeth. Guy was carrying 3 pistols on him, all loaded, spare magazines in a backpack, knives, and then at his house he had 5 more guns and several shotguns. I mean, this guy, and it turns out he's not mentally well. I've been covering his trial. He's going through a mental competency hearing right now to see if he's even at all, all there in the head. It doesn't sound like he is. And then there's another guy just last month who scaled the wall at Bobby's house, climbed over the wall, and told his security guards, he was demanding to see Mr. Kennedy right now. And his wife, Cheryl, was home at the time. She's in an upstairs bedroom looking out the window, watching this guy come across the lawn and being tackled by the security team that guards the house. And so the cops took him away and they put a restraining order on the guy. But in Los Angeles, that's only a misdemeanor. They couldn't hold him. And so they had to let him out within a few hours. You know what he did? He went right back to Bobby's house the same day. And then he climbed the gate, the wall. It's like a kind of a stone brick wall. He climbed it again, second time, in one day. That's just a taste. A taste. There are so many more stories I could tell you of the stalkers that Bobby is dealing with. And, some of them might be just overzealous fans. But let's not forget, John Lennon was killed by an overzealous fan. These people are dangerous to him.
So, Laurie, another thing is a lot of people, when you mention that, with all this thing that's going on that I've just mentioned that really concerned me, is the Australian government have just announced their first rollout of a digital ID, which is very scary. And I feel like a lot of the things that are going on are kind of a distraction for that. What is your opinion towards that?
Ooh, so scary. Yeah, I've been following that story too. And I'm trying to warn my American countrymen and women that this is closer than you think, guys. We're already doing a form of it here in the United States. We haven't gone as hardcore as Australia yet. They always seem to be ahead of us when it comes to draconian stuff. But
it's Australia. Well, it's not too bad because you got to remember there are like people who will say you sometimes will get silly people who say, "Oh, Australia's still in lockdown and New Zealand is," but not really. But it's definitely getting close to that, especially knowing the fact how there was a bank like a few months ago who said that they would shut down someone's account, for hate speech, which is a load of absolute ridiculousness for that bank to do, because what is hate speech in their definition?
right.
It's so funny, Laurie, how they'll accuse China, Russia, Iran, and all of the, like Cuba and Venezuela, all of these countries that are against, the Rothschild banking system and the New World Order, they'll accuse these countries of having a social credit system when in fact there isn't a social credit system in China. It's not like in China you're going to lose your job just because you criticize the government or not be able to go on a bus or not be able, like, I lived in Hong Kong and they're not doing any of this stuff. It's like, especially with you and me, where we've interviewed people from China and Russia, they're not doing this stuff. They're not. If anything, that social credit system where you criticize the government and you're not able to go on a bus and you're not able to go on a train or get doctor's appointment, that's most likely going to happen in the United States, because the United States is a corporation controlled by oligarchs.
Yeah, and we tried a form of that, of course, during COVID. COVID was like a test run to see how much tyranny the people would put up with, and how much bigotry and discrimination we would tolerate. when we were excluding unvaccinated people from public places and places of worship and schools and society and jobs and the grocery store. How much tyranny are the American people willing to put up with? Well, they got their answer. We said no to it. And thank God we have to resist this stuff. And what I've been warning because I'm big on privacy rights, especially digital privacy rights.
Oh, absolutely. Privacy is
And
everything.
I feel like I'm just talking to a wall. I can't seem to get my fellow Americans' attention. They don't even know it's happening. But I'm telling them because they're all freaking out about this digital ID in Australia. And I'm like,
Lori,
guys, we're already doing it here. And they're like, what? No, we're not. I'm like,
oh,
really?
absolutely.
Have
The
you tried?
CIA,
Have you tried
FBI,
calling? I'm just talking about to do basic functions with your government, basic
yeah,
transactions. For example, when you pay your taxes, let's say you need to call the IRS for some reason. Maybe you didn't get your tax refund or some kind of problem with your tax return, or you just want to log into your online account at irs.gov. When you go there and you try to do that, they will tell you that you have to go through an identity verification process and that
yeah.
they're going to send you to a shady private company, a contractor who has contracts with many agencies of the
How
federal
long have they been
government.
doing this in the United States for? Sounds like they've been doing this for years.
This really started during the COVID pandemic,
Oh,
when all
wow.
of these federal agencies were locked down and shuttered and closed, and taxpayers couldn't get through, say, to the IRS to discuss problems with an agent. They would send you through this third-party vendor that they contract with, and the name of the company is ID.me. ID Me. And in order to access your tax return, or do other things like collect unemployment, for example, during the pandemic, when people were locked down, they got this unemployment check basically for staying home. But to collect your money, you have to talk to this third party vendor, ID Me, and they look at you, turn over all of your personal data to them, including a biometric face scan of your face. Without your consent, you're literally forced to do it if you want to get your tax refund, if you want to get your unemployment check, if you want to get your Social Security or disability check, if you need to conduct business with the Veterans Administration, you have to go through ID Me. It's getting to the point where ID Me has all these big contracts with all of these major federal agencies. If you want to conduct business with your government, they force you to go through it, and then that is tied into your real ID, your digital ID. We started implementing that in the United States roughly about 20 years ago, and state by state, more states are now requiring that you have that. It has a digital chip in it, and that will connect to your ID Me profile. You see how this works? So basically, it's the same thing that Australia is doing. They're doing it much more out in the open here in the United States. They're not exactly telling you, and they didn't ask for our consent when they signed these contracts with a third-party vendor
Oh,
like ID Me.
especially with
They
the Patriot Act,
they
or
snuck it in. They
especially
snuck it
like the
in.
Patriot Act, the
Right.
Federal Reserve Act of 1913, the IRS, the Gold Standard Act. That's what these corporations do. Corporations can do these things without facing consequences. And the United States is a corporation controlled by the Rothschild Rockefeller banking cartel. It's been
Well,
that way since 1867, 76,
it
671, sorry.
it's kind of like, how they say the Biden administration is saying in the Missouri versus Biden case that, for example, well, it's not a violation of the First Amendment if a private company censors you, right? If Facebook or YouTube or some other company censors your speech, it's not a violation of the First Amendment because it's not the government censoring you, right? That's their argument. Well, that's the same argument that they're making here. The difference between what's happening in Australia and in the United States with this digital ID thing is in the States, this is a private company doing it, you see? So they're not
Yeah.
violating your Fourth Amendment right if it's a private company doing it. So it's a big lie. At least in Australia, the government's just doing it because they don't have a Fourth Amendment in Australia. So, I mean, if the Australian people tolerate that kind of tyranny, then they're going to get away with it. I would ask you to resist. Say
Oh, it's already
no.
happening. It's already
Yeah,
happening.
say
You know.
no. Tell them no. Don't do it. Don't do it. No.
So, Laurie, before we finish up today, is there anything else you would like to say?
No, I think we covered just about everything. We covered the globe in 60 minutes. We
Yeah.
did. We covered a lot of ground. But it's always a pleasure talking with you. This was a great conversation, Welsh. Thanks for having me back.
Well, thank you for coming on, Laurie. Where can people find you, Laurie?
You can find me on Twitter at Real Lori Spencer. I'm on YouTube. I do a show called the Strange Bedfellows Podcast. Just look for Strange Bedfellows Podcast on YouTube and Rumble. And I also host a podcast for the Kennedy supporters out there called Kennedy Americans. And we have a Rumble channel called Kennedy Americans and a YouTube channel. So if you are supporting Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or you're thinking about giving him your support, I hope you'll check out our podcast, and we talk about where he stands on the issues and what we think he can do for America. And yes, we know he can win. We don't think he can win. We know he can win. He's going to be the next president of the United States. Mark my words.
Well, anyways, thank you for coming on, Laurie. I just want to say to everybody, thank you for watching the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 138 today. Please go and check out Laurie Spencer's work. She's very fantastic. Go give her a like and follow on Twitter. Go follow her YouTube channel. Very good. She's very good, knowledgeable when it comes to, documents and things like Operation Unthinkable, like these other historical things that you won't hear from the mainstream media. Very knowledgeable person. Please go support and follow her work. And I just want to say to everybody, please remember to like and subscribe this video. Have a nice day, everybody. Thank you for joining the Welsh Republic Podcast, episode 138. Take care, everybody. Bye.